Hey guys, tonight we board a Roman warship. Not the polished kind you see in movies, but the real deal. All wood and wax, damp ropes, and the persistent smell of salted fish mixed with sweat. You're not some high-ranking officer with a wine goblet and sandals polished by servants. No, tonight you're a humble sailor, wearing rough woolen sandals that have seen better centuries. The deck beneath your feet creaks like a tired grandmother every time the waves shift. You squint against the Mediterranean sun, wondering what fresh horror your shift will bring. And yes, there's a toilet on this ship, or something like it. It's not private, it's definitely not clean, and frankly, you probably won't survive the experience without some psychological scarring. But don't worry, that comes late. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also tell me where you're tuning in from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the stern now, the back end of the ship, looking out over the choppy blue waters. The breeze tastes faintly of salt and something else. Maybe old olive. The trireme, a classic Roman warship, is built for speed and ramming, not luxury. Still, there's a method to the chaos. Rows of oarsmen grunting in unison, a centurion barking orders in Latin, and a cook who's definitely ignoring fire safety. There's no toilet sign, obviously. No neatly labeled restroom pointing to the back. You're gonna have to ask around or follow your nose. One of the older sailors gives you a grin missing 3 teeth, and gestures toward a wooden plank sticking out just above the waterline. You're not sure if it's part of the ship or just something someone forgot to take down, but when he pantomimes squatting and winks, you get the idea. Toilets aboard Roman ships were rudimentary at best. Unlike the mighty public latrines of Rome, grand marble benches with flowing water and gossip aplenty, these were little more than designated spots over the sea. Just a hole, a bit of rope, and a prayer the ship didn't tilt too hard. On larger ships, historians believe there might have been a small enclosed area, perhaps even with a seat. But don't get your hopes up. It wasn't exactly the spa at Pompeii. You shuffle toward the spot, careful not to trip over a coil of rope or disturb the amphorae tied down near the oars. The air grows ripe. It seems your fellow sailors have been making use of the facilities with wild abandon. You realize now the phrase answering nature's call hits different when you're on a boat surrounded by 80 other men with high-fiber diet. Curiously, some ships were fitted with wooden projections, planks sticking out from the sides, allowing sailors to relieve themselves directly over the waves. A practical solution if not a comfortable one. No seatbelt, no railing, just raw trust in your thigh strength and the goodwill of Neptune. And here's the kicker. Scholars are still divided on whether these shipboard facilities had any sort of plumbing. Some suggest the clever Romans built small chutes or clay channels to guide waste away from the deck. Others argue that gravity and a hull were all the technology needed. One thing is certain, Roman engineers were brilliant, but they weren't miracle workers. You weren't going to find a flush handle or mint-scented soap. You overhear 2 sailors arguing in low Latin. One insists the emperor himself once had a golden toilet aboard his barge. The other scoffs, says it was silver at best, and meant more for show than, practical use. The true Emperor Caligula did have a pleasure barge with lavish fittings, possibly even a proper latrine. But you're not Caligula. You're barely getting a seat at all. A gust of wind nearly knocks you sideways as you gingerly approach the edge. You lower your borrowed tunic, balancing like a toddler trying their first squat. The waves below hiss and curl, an ever-present reminder that one wrong move means a very wet, very embarrassing splash. You think of home, of proper toilet, of things that didn't involve the risk of sea urchin-related injuries. You sigh. Behind you the cook whistles a tune older than Rome itself. Somewhere nearby a seagull lands on a spar and stares at you with judgmental eyes. You decide now is not the time. The ship lurches, a barrel rolls dangerously close to your ankles and a shout goes up from the rowers. Training exercises, just what you needed. You clamber back to relative safety, grateful to have not lost your dignity or your sponge stick. Yes, the infamous tessoria, a sponge on a stick, shared among users, cleaned allegedly in vinegar between uses. But that's a horror for another section. For now, you find a spot to sit, away from the smell, out of direct sunlight, and breathe in the damp air of naval life. Your shift starts soon. You'll be rowing for hours, eating salted fish, and avoiding the plank with all your might. But hey, at least you've now seen the toilet. You lean against a barrel of salted olives, legs still wobbling slightly from your near plunge into the sea. The ship rocks gently, more rhythm now than chaos, and the slow creak of timber settles into the background noise like an old lullaby. It's time to get your bearings, to figure out the ship itself, this strange floating fortress that carries its crew, its weapons, and yes, its humble toilet across oceans, and into battles. The Roman trireme isn't exactly luxurious. It's long and narrow, built for speed and precision rather than comfort. 3 rows of oars stacked like bunk beds on either side, with weary men rowing in sweaty silence, or humming tuneless songs to keep the beat. The deck, your new home, is cluttered with rigging, amphorae filled with water or oil, and the occasional rat that dares to scurry across an officer's boot. No one screams. That's just Gerald the rat. He's part of the crew now. This particular ship has a small wooden cabin near the stern. You peek inside once the coast is clear, literally, since your commanding officer just stepped out to yell at someone and see a cramped space filled with scrolls, charts, and the heavy scent of tallow. No toilet here either. Just a chamber pot tucked behind a chest of supply. Officers, you suspect, relieve themselves indoors. They get privacy, they get shade, and sometimes they even get cushions. You get plank duty. The rest of the ship is divided into zones: storage, weapons, sleeping spots, if you can call some space between ropes, a bed, and a section near the bow where a few lucky souls are assigned kitchen duty. They stir lentils and barley into mush, barely distinguishable from the water it's cooked in. Occasionally they toss fish scraps overboard. You hope they aim well. That same side of the ship hosts the relief platform, and you'd rather not think too hard about overlapping splash zones. Toilets, such as they aren't even called that. No one says toilet in ancient Rome. They refer to them as latrini or necessaria. Very poetic. But out here on the sea, there's no marble-lined public bathhouse to lean on while you chat about gladiator gossip. No mosaics, no columns, just a wooden board with a hole and the quiet hope that the tide is going the right way. The design varies depending on the size of the ship. Some triremes had a single overhanging platform near the stern, supported by beams and rigged with ropes for stability or to fish out unlucky users. On larger vessels like merchant ships or military flagships, there may have been 2 or more such facilities, spaced out for efficiency, though the air quality near them left something to be desired. Curiously, archaeologists have yet to find a perfectly preserved shipboard toilet. That's right, no pristine Roman poop chute on display in a museum. What we know comes from descriptions, conjecture, and the occasional depressingly honest graffiti carved into ship walls. You think back to a fellow sailor telling you about the toilet of Antiochus, a legendary naval loo so clean it had pebbles for wiping. Historians mostly agree this was a joke, unless pebbles were a form of tough love hygiene. You shuffle toward the midsection of the ship, and notice something: a bucket, filled halfway with seawater, and what appears to be a very bored sponge. The bucket's purpose becomes clear as 2 men line up beside it with a sort of weary resignation. Communal cleansing. We'll circle back to that, probably when you're too sleepy to protest. The trireme itself isn't just practical, it's intimidating. Painted eyes decorate the prow, a tradition meant to ward off evil and help the ship see its way forward. In battle it rams enemy vessels with its bronze-sheathed nose, turning boats into driftwood and soldiers into swimmers. But here in peacetime, the ship is a self-contained little world, floating somewhere between the realms of discipline and organized chaos. It creaks again, always creak. You wonder how much of this wood is original, how much was patched in port, and how much is just decorative. A junior officer walks past, his tunic flapping like a towel in the wind. He gives you a stern look, probably wondering why you're not swabbing something, and you casually reach for a rope, pretending it needs adjusting. There's a faint smell in the air now, not bad necessarily, just historic, a mix of sweat, salt, old leather and cooked lentils that sticks to your nostrils like a memory. It's the scent of thousands of men who have taken turns aboard this vessel, leaving behind their labor, their dreams and possibly their socks. And somewhere in all this mess, hidden among supplies and routines, is the most human of inventions, a place to go when nature calls. This ship, crude as it may be, is a marvel of Roman engineering. It slices through water with uncanny efficiency, powered by coordinated muscle and the occasional gust of divine wind. But even Rome, for all its gods and glory, couldn't make sea toileting a pleasant experience. So as you sit back and look around, let yourself admire the bones of the ship, the symmetry of its oars, the tension in its sails, and the silent promise of that modest, sea-sprayed plank at the stern. Not a throne, exactly, but in its own way, majestic. You wake up to the sounds of grumbling and flatulence. This, you now understand, is not a malfunction of the ship, it's just breakfast aboard a Roman warship. Lentil mush again, garnished with a single olive if you're lucky. You chew in silence beside the same men you row with, sleep beside, and unfortunately relieve yourself near. Personal space, like fine wine and dry socks, is a luxury well beyond your pay grade, and yet somehow Roman society has developed an entire etiquette around bathroom use. Even out here on the brine, back on land, in the city of Rome itself, the public latrines are communal marvels, long stone benches with keyhole-shaped holes, built over flowing water systems. You would sit there beside your neighbor, handle your business, and casually discuss gladiator gossip or tax complaints. There were no dividers, no stalls, and certainly no modesty. This same no-fuss philosophy gets packed up and brought to sea, shrunk, splintered, and nailed to the back of your ship. The result? A practice that combines necessity, discomfort, and the unnerving awareness that you're never truly alone. But before we explore the full indignities of your morning ritual, let's talk about the tersorium. Yes, this is the part where sponge sticks become the star of the show. Picture a wooden rod about the length of your forearm, with a sea sponge attached at one end. This isn't some luxurious bath accessory. It's your toilet paper, your cleansing tool, and your very questionable friend. In public latrines, they were stored in vinegar buckets between uses, supposedly disinfecting them for the next user. At sea, vinegar is a precious resource. You're not entirely sure what they clean the sponges with here. Seawater, optimism. This sponge on a stick isn't personalized. You don't name it. You don't carry it around like a treasured utensil. You use it, rinse it, and replace it in the communal bucket with a polite nod to fate. Sailors call it the devil's toothbrush, though mostly under their breath. The Roman attitude toward all this was, well, practical. They didn't see toilets as private or shameful. Going to the bathroom was simply another human activity, like eating, praying, or complaining about your superiors. That said, some social norms did exist. Elite Romans often used perfumed cloths or even wool instead of a sponge. Wealth, it seems, bought not just better seating but gentler wiping. Back on your ship, a routine has developed. In the early hours just after the cook sets the lentils to boil and before drills begin, there's an unofficial toilet window. You queue along the railing like a nervous flock of pigeons. One by one you shuffle onto the plank, squat with care, and hope for a calm sea. Sometimes a rogue wave turns the experience into an impromptu shower. Sailors call this Neptune's rebuke. Nearby, a younger crewmate fumbles with his tunic. He's still learning the dance of balancing fabric, dignity, and gravity. You offer no help. Some lessons are best learned in solitude. There's even a rank-based pecking order to the whole affair. Officers get first access. Their portion of the plank is freshly scrubbed, shielded slightly by a makeshift screen, and scented if barely with a sprig of rosemary tied to the post. Sailors get what's left, the weathered wood, the cracked bucket, and a view of Gerald the rat, nibbling biscuit crumbs beside the vinegar pail. And if you're wondering whether any of this comes with instructions, say a training manual or orientation session, think again. You figure it out by watching others, by making mistakes, and by the occasional shouted correction from someone more experienced. The phrase "aim better, Muck" rings out more often than you'd like. But what's truly remarkable is how normal it becomes. In just a few days you stop flinching at the smells, you stop caring that people are talking about you while you're mid-squat. You even start judging the tide patterns to pick the best time to go. That's right, you've become a toilet connoisseur. This cultural indifference to bathroom privacy is, in many ways, refreshing. There's no hiding, no shame, no elaborate euphemisms. When nature calls, you answer with a wooden stick, a strong stomach, and a squint at the horizon. One sailor, a former builder named Tertius, swears the latrines on land used to have statues of gods watching over them, sometimes even murals. He says this wistfully, like a man recalling his first love. Here, there are no gods, just salt-stained ropes, creaky planks, and the eternal sponge. You finish your turn and rise carefully, tying your tunic with one hand while grabbing the support rope with the other. A rogue wave rocks the ship. Nothing serious, but enough to make you mutter a curse to Jupiter and all his weather-related mischief. Back in your spot, you sip warm water from a skin and try not to think about how long the sponge bucket has gone without a proper cleaning. Someone should say something, maybe you, but not today. The sun is climbing now, casting dappled light across the creaking deck as the sea rolls with rhythmic indifference beneath your feet. You're settling into your routine: oar shift, lentils, an occasional prayer to avoid sea lice. But one mystery keeps tugging at your mind. How exactly did the Romans engineer a toilet that worked on a ship, especially when said ship was basically a floating log with ideas above its station? The truth, no one entirely agrees. Historians, bless them, are still arguing about it. Some scholars believe Roman naval toilets were glorified holes, wooden cutouts suspended over the water with gravity handling the rest. Others argue that more advanced Roman ships featured rudimentary plumbing, angled pipes, ceramic channels, and tiny drainage systems that ushered waste out to sea. And then there are those who claim sailors simply squatted off the side when needed, with nothing more than a rope and hose. What we do know is that Roman land toilets were marvels of low-tech efficiency. Underground sewers, constant water flow, and even cushioned seating in some public latrines. Surely they'd try to bring some version of that convenience aboard ship, right? Well, yes and no. Shipbuilding constraints meant every plank and every nail had a purpose. Extra space for elaborate toilets? Unlikely. Still, on larger warships, quinqueremes for example, there might be room for a semi-enclosed latrine, especially for the office. In fact, some accounts describe built-in boxes at the stern with openings carved into the floor, leading directly to the ocean. Picture a wooden outhouse with no privacy and a fine view of the ship's wake. A few daring archaeologists have claimed to discover the remains of such marine commodes in shipwrecks, pointing to oddly shaped wooden panels or hollowed-out planks as evidence. Others disagree, suggesting these were simply storage features or structural reinforcement. Toilet archaeology, it seems, is an inexact science. And then there's the debate over marine flushing. Some theorists believe that ships used small water cisterns or buckets to rinse waste down through channels. A sort of proto-bidet meets fire hazard. More conservative voices scoff at this, arguing that even the most sanitation-conscious sailor wouldn't waste fresh water at sea. Salt water maybe, vinegar, if they were truly desperate. But plumbing, that's a stretch. And yet, the Romans were nothing if not resourceful. They brought aqueducts to deserts, heated floors in villas, and invented fast food centuries before drive-thrus. Could they have figured out a way to make ship toilets tolerable? Possibly, but then again, tolerable is relative. The other complication, of course, is the sea itself. Roman warships weren't gliding over glassy lakes. They were carving through unpredictable Mediterranean swells, bouncing and jolting like stubborn sea beasts. Any toilet system had to account for constant motion, surprise storms, and the unfortunate truth that seasickness and sanitation rarely get along. You remember the ship tilting just last night, waves pounding the hull as the crew scrambled to secure cargo. Several amphorae rolled, one cracked, and the vinegar from the cleansing bucket got liberally splashed across the deck. The cook, stepping out of the galley, mistook it for wine and nearly toasted the gods before catching the sour tang. Suffice it to say, plumbing didn't fare well that night. Still, even with limited tech, the idea of channeling waste away from the ship's interior was not lost on the Romans. Basic systems, sloped planks, exit holes, and careful bucket placement were likely in play. Even if you're squatting with your tunic bunched in your armpits and a suspicious seagull eyeing your exposed backside, there's probably some faint Roman engineering trying to preserve your dignity, or at least your balance. But in the end, maybe that's the lesson. The sea doesn't care about your toilet preferences. Storms will rise, planks will creak, the vinegar bucket will inevitably get knocked over. All you can do is hang on, try not to fall in, and hope no one is watching too close. Back on deck, a fellow sailor named Gaius claims he once used a ship toilet so advanced it flushed itself every time the ship rocked. You're pretty sure this was just a bucket nailed loosely to the railing, but Gaius insists it was divine innovation. He also believes garlic keeps sharks away, so your trust in him is measured. You lean over the rail now, watching the water churn and froth below. Somewhere down there, centuries of sailor waste have drifted into the tides, joining the chorus of history in all its fragrant, forgotten glory. And above you the sails snap to life, catching a gust that smells faintly of distant figs and the possibility of shore. But not yet. For now you're still afloat, adrift in mystery, salt and a shipboard toilet that may or may not be leaking beneath your... By now you've accepted that Roman warships aren't floating spars. The comforts of land are far away, and your expectations have sunk lower than the sponge bucket at high tide. But there's still one truth that stings like vinegar in a cut. Not all bottoms aboard this vessel are treated equally. You've probably noticed the officers seem more relaxed, better fed, and suspiciously less urgent when it comes to scrambling toward the toilet plank. That's because surprise rank mattered even when relieving yourself. Let's start with the basics. Officers aboard Roman ships typically had private quarters, small, cramped, and prone to dampness. Yes, but still private. Within these spaces they often kept chamber pots. These ceramic or bronze bowls were nothing fancy, but they didn't require balancing on a wind-wobbled board over the sea. That alone was worth the promotion. The pots would be emptied regularly, likely by the unlucky cabin boy or lowest-ranked sailor in the officer's entourage. You may have to row until your arms fall off, but at least you don't carry a bucket of poop through a tight corridor while trying not to slosh it on your superior's boots. Small wins. Meanwhile, the standard crewman, that's you, is offered precisely one amenity: access to the communal plank. It's located near the stern, rigged with a rope for stability and possibly a mild sense of dignity. Though, considering how much splashing occurs and how many seagulls seem to hover nearby in judgment, dignity may be optimistic. Hierarchy extended to every aspect of Roman life, including the toilet. Officers' sponge sticks might be personally maintained. Their vinegar rinses were fresher. They didn't have to queue beside sweating deckhands who reeked of fish guts and regret. You, on the other hand, get to hope the last guy rinsed the tersorium before setting it back in the bucket. It goes further still. On larger warships there might be more than one toilet, sir. A ship's carpenter you chatted with during lunch told you about a quinquereme he once served on, a 5-row oared beast with over 300 men aboard. That ship had 2 toilet areas, one near the prow, primarily for enlisted sailors, and one sternside for higher rank. The prow latrine, he said, caught more wind and less splash, but smelled much worse. Go figure. And if you were really important, say a commander, admiral, or visiting senator, well, you might be allowed a screen. A literal privacy screen made of cloth or wood, offering partial visual cover from the rest of the crew. Not total secrecy, mind you. The sounds still carried, but at least you didn't have an audience. One ship's tale even speaks of an officer who had a bronze chamber pot with lion feet, and his family crest etched into the side. A bit much, probably, But Romans loved a good display of wealth, even mid-bowel movement. As you watch one of the junior officers exit his quarters, you can't help but notice his sandals are still clean, no deck grime, no smear of fish guts. He strolls casually to the edge of the ship, not to use the toilet of course, just to observe the horizon, arms folded, tunic pressed. You meanwhile are tying knots in your own belt just to keep the sea breeze from betraying your modesty. But here's the real kicker. With rank came options. High-ranking Romans were known to carry personal perfumes, hand towels and even scented oil. An admiral might freshen up with a dab of frankincense after using the facilities. You have a rag that's damp, and you don't know why. In many ways this reflects broader Roman social norms. The elite could afford comfort even in discomfort. Senators in Rome lounged on cushioned toilet seats, discussing politics while attendants waited nearby with silver basins of rosewater. You cling to a rope while hoping Gerald the rat doesn't bite you mid-squat. You start to notice how this hierarchy plays out subtly too. Officers never queue. They never clean the sponge bucket. They never argue over whose turn it is to scrub the deck around the latrine zone. Those tasks fall to sailors like you, good, honest, perpetually unwashed sailors. Yet, oddly, this doesn't breed resentment. Not really. There's a kind of weary acceptance in the air. Like everyone has agreed to this unspoken code. The officers command, the sailors row. The ship floats, and the toilet plank in all its splintered glory serves as the great equalizer, though slightly more equal for some. Still, every now and then, nature reminds even the most well-ranked Roman that they're only human. One particularly stormy evening you recall an officer stumbling out of his quarters, pale and frantic, trying to make it to the stern latrine. Instead, he nearly collided with a support beam, slipped on a piece of spilled lentil mush, and let out a string of curses so colourful they may have invented a new dialect. No one laughed, not out loud, but the story circulated quietly among the rowers for days. You remind yourself of that story now as your turn on the toilet plank arrives. You step up with the grace of a man who knows exactly where the loose board is. You grip the rope, ignore the sea spray, and tell yourself you're stronger for enduring this. Because rank may come with perks, but resilience, that's earned one squat at a time. You've developed a sixth sense for when the latrine is free, an uncanny ability to detect when the last crewmate has done their business, and the salty sea breeze has aired out the aftermath. It's not a glamorous skill, but out here it's invaluable. You're no longer just a rower, you're a latrine tactician. And just in time too, because today, something remarkable happened. As you're heading back from yet another thrilling session of scraping barnacles off the hull, you overhear the one thing that always cuts through the chatter of rope pulls and gull cries: toilet gossip. You pause mid-step. Two sailors are whispering near the aft deck, voices low and conspiratorial. "Did you hear about Flavius?" one says. The other shakes his head wide-eyed. "Tried to sneak a second go during peak hour. Got caught. Now he's on sponge duty for a week." You wince instinctively. Sponge duty, the lowest of the low. Not just keeping the bucket topped up with water and possibly vinegar, but also fishing it out when someone inevitably drops it overboard, which happens more than you'd expect. You're not supposed to laugh, but when a burly man yelps and dives into the Mediterranean after a sponge on a stick, well, some moments are funnier than others. Toilet time aboard a Roman warship isn't just functional, it's social. You learn a lot perched beside your fellow sailors, even if beside means 6 feet away, clutching a support rope and pretending you're somewhere else entirely. Conversations drift through the briny air, quiet musings, loud arguments, and the occasional off-key sea shanty. Someone insists on singing through the process. It's weirdly comforting in a deeply unfortunate way. One old sailor, Marcus the Elder, not to be confused with Marcus the slightly younger who has a mustache, spends his entire toilet time describing the pastries his wife used to bake. You've never met this woman, nor the pastries, but you could now describe the shape, texture and exact raisin distribution of her honey cakes with academic precision. Another guy, Lucius, prefers to theorize, Not about toilets, about politics. If Caesar had invested in spiced lentils, he once announced mid-squat, we'd be an empire of flavor, not war. The man's trousers were around his ankles, the wind howling, and still he delivered that with full senator energy. You had to respect. Then there's the prankster. Every crew has one. Yours is Sextus, a man with the soul of a circus and the timing of a demigod. His favorite routine, sneaking up behind toilet goers and imitating the squawk of a gull in distress. Many have flinched. One man nearly toppled. But not all the chatter is humorous. Sometimes sitting quietly above the waves, people get reflective. You hear about homesickness, regrets, romances left behind. Sailors mutter poetry scratched into wood with belt buckles. They recite prayers to unknown gods. One man even confessed, eyes misty, that he missed the quiet of farm life. Not the smell but the peace. A different kind of stink, he called it. The communal nature of Roman toileting fosters this weird intimacy. Unlike today's closed stalls and hushed decorum, Romans embraced the open-air honesty of it all. On land, public latrines often had as many as 20 seats in a row, no dividers, and zero pretense. People sat, chatted, and even passed shared sponge sticks like community torches. The sea version was smaller, saltier, and slightly more terrifying, but the same spirit held. You talk, you joke, you vent, you try not to fall in. Historians believe this shared experience helped bond crews. It wasn't just about sanitation, it was about connection. And on long voyages, with nothing but water, oars and lentils in your future, even toilet banter feels like precious human contact. You recall one particularly windy morning when the ship tilted a little too hard during someone's turn. The man shrieked, caught the rope just in time, and was saved by the sheer willpower of 4 sailors who linked arms to pull him back. No one spoke of it afterward, but they all shared their extra olives with him that night. A silent, salty tribute. Even the ship itself seems to listen. The creaking timbers echo stories. The wind carries jokes farther than it should, and sometimes if you listen just right, you'd swear the very plank you squat on has memories of its own. Probably not good ones, but memories all the same. You learn the rhythms. Who prefers morning visit, who grunts with purpose and who whistles through the entire ordeal, who likes to talk, and who needs silence. It's weirdly respectful, a choreography of necessity and mutual understanding, and then as quickly as it began, the moment someone's turn finishes, they rejoin the deck, and another sailor walks quietly to take their place. The cycle continues, steady, smelly and sacred. As you adjust your belt and step back into the world of sails and commands, you glance at the plank. A new recruit approaches hesitant. You nod, the universal sign for brace yourself, and he exhales like a condemned man. Because out here on a Roman warship, the toilet isn't just a place, it's an experience, and everyone has a story.
You rise before dawn, the horizon still a sliver of violet light. To your familiar rhythm, row, breathe, row. Soon enough, even your bladder agrees it's time for a break. You make your way carefully toward the plank at the stern, clutching your wooden sponge stick like a lifeline. This is the famous tessorium, the communal cleaning tool that has earned you equal parts fascination and dread. You squat over the sea, the chilled morning air brushing your skin, and grasp the sponge end of your tessorium. It's roughly carved about the size of a small melon, and trimmed with coarse fiber to absorb the mess. You press it tentatively against yourself, deciding against counting the rings of age in the wood. Some say the grain can reveal when the tree was felled. A mainstream fact here, Romans routinely rinsed their sponges in vinegar between uses to disinfect them, a practice indicative of their surprisingly advanced approach to hygiene, even if it stung like a curse. Yet at sea, vinegar was precious. Historians still argue whether naval crews used diluted salt water, leftover oil, or even nothing but a hope and a prayer to clean their tessoria. As you swipe the sponge, you note the slight bounce of the deck beneath you, the inevitable slosh of salt spray, and the faint tang of brine mixing with other aromas. Your grip tightens, A rogue gust pulls at your tunic, and you steady yourself by looping an arm around the mast post. Balance is critical. A slip here sends you and your sponge into the Aegean. When you're done, you dip the sponge into the rinse bucket. It's half full of murky liquid, probably seawater mixed with last night's vinegar dregs. You swirl it once, twice, then wedge it back against the wooden rim so it can drip. You glance at the next sailor in line. He gives you a nod of grim appreciation. No words needed. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some Roman medical writers warned that overuse of the same sponge could transfer parasites or intestinal worms between users. They recommended occasional boiling or submerging in hot water if available, a suggestion practically useless on a rocking warship. You wonder if that's why some crews tied tiny bundles of fresh herbs, mint or rue to the handle, hoping the aroma would mask both algae and ailments. You set the tessorium back in its bucket and retrieve a fresh wooden handle. They're unmarked, unnumbered, and unloved. No one claims ownership. Yes, you think this is medieval roommate living with ancient flair. Despite the shared horror, there's etiquette here. You never use the same side of the sponge twice, at least not if you hope for some semblance of cleanliness. You rotate it like a pro, making 4/4 turns before dipping. You're proud of this skill. When you first arrived, you almost used the bottom half of the sponge only, until a seasoned sailor tapped your shoulder and whispered, "Rotate, lad. Rotate." Still, no matter how practiced you become, tension builds when the bucket nears empty. You've seen fights erupt over the last usable tessorium. You've even witnessed men fashion makeshift wipes from scraps of cloth or tangled seaweed when desperation struck. One crewman swore he found a pink scarf in the bottom of his chest, belonging, he claimed, to a senator's wife. You never learned how that turned out. And yet this ritual, grotesque to modern minds, has a strange dignity. The act of sharing the tessorium proved crew solidarity, an unspoken pact. We endure this together. You've heard that on some ships sponges were marked by color: red for shift 1, blue for shift 2, to reduce confusion. Whether that ever actually happened is unclear, but rumor has it, like a sailor's tall tale. After washing, you place the sponge stick carefully between two support ropes to dry in the sun. The salt will harden it slightly, so the next time you use it, you might experience a scratchy Neptune's exfoliation. You laugh quietly. Humor helps. Below deck, the sponge bucket sits beside the water amphora. Occasionally a curious rat dips its paw in the brine to taste test, then scampers off with a look of mild regret. You've grown accustomed to Gerald the rat's antics. The man seems almost comforting, a fellow survivor of shipboard indignities. As you return to your oar station, you carry the lingering brine smell and the faint tang of vinegar on your fingertips. You tuck the tessorium behind you out of sight, like a soldier hiding their weapon before returning to the line. Later, during the midday lull, you'll join others in recounting the latest tessorium mishap: spilled sponge, missing bucket, or the sailor who dropped his overboard and had to swim after it like a pantomime. These stories become legend, part of your shared lore. Yes, toilet mishaps make for surprisingly compelling sea shanties. By nightfall, the tessorium ritual repeats. Perhaps you catch a hint of rosemary, someone tied to the bucket post, or find a twig of lavender floating in the rim. Small comforts, unlikely but welcome. And tomorrow the cycle begins again. Because aboard a Roman warship, the tessorium is more than a tool. It's a testament to endurance, resourcefulness, and the undeniable fact that even an empire built on conquest can't conquer basic biology. You're 3 days into the voyage when disaster strikes. Well, minor disaster, but on a ship, minor disasters magnify quickly. You're on deck during your off shift, leaning against a coil of rope, watching the sun glitter on the waves, when you hear splintering wood and a collective gasp. The latrine plank, your familiar refuge, has failed at sea. One moment it's just another creaky board over the abyss. The next it cracks beneath a burly sailor's weight with a sharp crack, sending him teetering dangerously close to the rail. You rush forward, heart pounding as his feet scramble for purchase. He grabs the safety rope, breathing hard while the plank hangs limp like a broken limb. This is naval plumbing gone wrong, mainstream fact. Shipboard toilets in the Roman Navy were often nothing more than unsupported wooden beams attached to the hull, making them vulnerable to wear, rot and sudden failure under stress. Historians still argue whether these beams were ever reinforced with metal brackets or simply replaced after each campaign, but here and now yours is clearly past its prime. The captain storms over, toga flapping, face pale beneath his bronze helmet. He barks at the carpenter, who inspects the plank with grim resolve, muttering about poor maintenance and the curse of Neptune. The carpenter, a stoic fellow with wood chips in his hair, promises a fix by sunset. Meanwhile, the latrine zone is cordoned off with lengths of spare rope. You and your crewmates exchange wry looks. No bathroom until then. Cue low, veteran humor. Well, I always wanted an excuse to hold it, one sailor whispers, grinning. Another groans. Guess I'm teaching the fish some new material. You stifle a laugh, though your own bladder is already reminding you of its existence. Uncomfortable humor, but aboard a warship humor is essential. With your usual relief spot out of commission, you're forced to adapt. The carpenter rigs a temporary solution. A sturdy barrel secured over the side, lid removed, propped on a crate. It's functional, matter of fact, but far from ideal. You eye it dubiously. The plank may have had dignity, this barrel has none. A fringe tidbit. Some accounts suggest Roman sailors sometimes used slotted bronze plates, repurposed from broken weapons, as makeshift latrine supports, basically turning a damaged javelin rest into a portable toilet. Whether they did this at sea or only in emergencies is unclear, but the idea of balancing on a slotted weapon mount sends a chill down your spine. You hope your captain isn't that inventive. The barrel arrangement brings its own set of challenges. First, the barrel wobbles in the swell, forcing you to grip the railing with one hand and the barrel's rim with the other. Balance becomes an art form. Second, there's no rinse bucket near. The carpenter couldn't spare the crew's vinegar supply, so the sponge bucket stays back near the now useless plank. You improvise by dunking your tesorium in a freshwater amphora, against orders, and tossing half a handful of seaweed in the bottom to absorb liquid. Modern moral outrage would decry seaweed wipes, but you're grateful for any scrubbing aid. You approach your turn gingerly, feeling the curious stares of fellow crew. Some lean in, offering sympathetic nods. Others whisper bets on how long you'll last without tipping the barrel over. You glance at Gerald the rat, perched on a beam above, as if judging your technique. The animal's dark eyes shine. You hope it's not hungry for sponge. Because it's 2 hours until sunset, you know this barrel seat is your home for now. You plan your visit strategically, early morning when the sea is calmer, late afternoon before more drills begin. Without the familiar plank to time your visits, you become acutely aware of currents, wind shifts, and the smell of approaching storms that might rock the vessel into chaos. As you squat, you remind yourself of proper procedure. Hold the sponge far enough from the rim to avoid unpleasant contact. Rotate it like a professional. Minimize motion. Imagine you're on solid ground rather than a floating latrine of despair. You close your eyes, recite a prayer to Closina, goddess of the sewer, and focus on releasing your burden safely. Then you dip the sponge in the amphora, listen for the clink of seaweed, and thank fortune you're not doing this mid-battle. Battles would complicate all this. Under siege you'd hold it, sometimes for days, rather than risk using a faltering facility or a barrel exposed to projectiles. Siege conditions turned desperate men silent, their bladders locked, sweat mingling with fear. You recall the phrase "holding until dawn," used literally dawn relief after a night of cannon fire. Hold at your peril. Hold until the situation ends. That ordeal is a separate horror, but for now, the makeshift barrel suffice. While you finish and climb down, you catch the carpenter examining scrap metal. He's sketching out a plan for a reinforced latrine with metal straps and wax-sealed joints. It sounds optimistic, but Romans did wax their pipes to prevent leaks in villas, so why not apply that at sea? Historians debate whether wax sealing ever sailed past port repairs or vanished with the fall of the Republic. You shrug. If he can patch the plank, you'll believe in anything. Back at your station, you notice the lieutenant inspecting the barrel with a nose wrinkle. He draws a deep breath, mutters "need more vinegar," and stalks off. You suspect this is code for someone's getting in trouble. You resist the urge to snicker. Instead, you focus on your oar.
The wood is smooth beneath your calloused palms, the rhythm of strokes comforting after latrine chaos. The sea laps rhythmically. The gulls chatter in the rigging, and for a moment you forget about broken boards and barrels of waste. By dusk, the carpenter triumphantly secures a new plank, thicker, reinforced with bronze nails and slanted just so. The latrine reclaiming ceremony is low-key, a quick inspection, a hiss of approval from the lieutenant, and a word to the crew. No fanfare, but you sense collective relief. That night, with the plank restored, you're first in line. You ascend confidently, balancing like a champion, and reclaim your throne above the waves. You take a moment to salute the new beam, your trusty ally, once more, and probably murmur a silent thanks to the carpenter. Because on a Roman warship, when toilets fail at sea, you learn the true meaning of adaptability, camaraderie, and the fragile glory of a working latrine.
The midday sun beats down, turning the deck into a sun-baked stage of glinting wood and coiling ropes. You've just finished your row, arms trembling, back humming. But before you collapse beside the water amphora, there's another ritual to observe: naval hygiene. Yes, on a Roman warship, staying clean is as strategic as nailing down the oars. After all, a fresh crew is a functional crew, even if fresh here means less rankling. You step toward the small washing station, a plank running along the side of the ship where barrels of seawater and vinegar stand guard. The Romans prized cleanliness, believing that a quick rinse could ward off disease and bolster morale. On land, bathhouses lined major roads. At sea, the concept shrinks dramatically. You've got 2 basins, one for plain salt water, one mixed with a splash of vinegar. The vinegar bucket is guarded jealously by the ship's medicus, who claims it kills germs. Historians still argue whether vinegar actually did much beyond masking odors. But you're not about to question his authority when plague lurks below decks. You dunk your hands first, swirling them in the cool salt water. The brine cracks the skin slightly, an unexpected exfoliation courtesy of nature. You flex your fingers, letting the water sluice away sweat and grime. The tactile sensation is oddly soothing. The rough wood beneath you, the rhythmic slap of waves, the faint tang of vinegar nearby. Your fellow sailors queue behind you, leaning on the railing and humming low tunes as they wait their turn. When it's time for vinegar, you approach the second barrel with respectful caution. The sour smell makes your nostrils flare, but you dip a cloth, one of the few personal items you manage to keep dry, and wipe your face. The fabric emerges stained and damp, carrying the day's sweat and the sharp tang of sour wine. You press the cloth to your forehead, imagining you're an aristocrat in a marble bathhouse adorned with roses. Reality bites. You're perched on a plank 10 feet above water that's likely hosting half the Mediterranean's bacteria. A mainstream fact. Roman medical text recommended regular washing with vinegar to prevent skin infections and repel lice, a common scourge among soldiers and sailors. Yet at sea, true fresh water was scarce. Historians still debate whether naval crews rationed water specifically for hygiene or reserved it solely for drinking. Some suspect the vinegar barrel doubled as a disinfectant for wounds. Others argue its main function was morale. Nothing cheers a man quite like smelling faintly of pickle. Next comes the teeth. The ship's medicus carries a small box of charcoal powder and crushed pumice, a rudimentary toothpaste. You wet a twig, scrape its end into a frayed brush, dip it in powder and scrub. The sensation is gritty, like brushing with boot leather. When you rinse, a swirl of black flecks drifts on the surface and you smile to reveal teeth that gleam as well as they will under these conditions. A fringe tidbit. Some Romans believed mouthwash infused with mint and myrrh could prevent bad breath for days, a claim likely tested in taverns more than on warships. Your hair is armed with a comb carved from bone. You stand before a mirror of polished bronze, one precious piece of metal you've never seen on any other part of this vessel. You carefully untangle salt-crusted knots, waves of coarse hair slipping through the teeth. The medicus insists on a drop of olive oil to smooth the strands. You smear it sparingly, wishing you had more. The rest of your head sports a sheen of greenish warmth that catches the sun. As you comb, you recall land-born hair rituals involving sweet-smelling oils and elaborate braids. Here simplicity rules.
A quick tidy prevents lice nests. Now your turn at the so-called foot bath. You lower your boots into a shallow trough of vinegar and water, swishing them gently. Soles that have stomped through mud, blood and fish guts need care too. The liquid fizzes where leather meets brine, and you hum an off-key tune to keep the rhythm. The soles emerge softer, the smell a curious blend of vinegar and seaweed. The trough itself is a plank, nailed between ore benches. Ingenious if rudimentary. But hygiene isn't just washing, it's also protecting. Under your tunic, you apply a thin layer of balms, a mix of beeswax, ground aromatic herbs, and a hint of lead for preservation. It's sticky but shields your skin from chafing under sandaled straps. You rub it in, fingertips warming the mixture. The scent of lavender and sage drifts upward, a small luxury you share with only the hopeful and the hungry rats. All around, sailors mimic your motion. Some use water from the amphora to scrub elbows. Others swab the backs of their necks, where sunburn and sweat create a perfect storm for rash. One crewman even uses 2 sponge sticks, one for personal areas, and one for washing. An innovation you admire, though the thought of cross-contamination makes you shudder. Light joke drifts through your mind. Nothing says empire builder like scrubbing your own armpits with club soda and vinegar. Yet this routine, however crude, bonds you. Joke with a fellow rower about starting a perfume business. Get your battlefield musk, a splash of garlic, a hint of mildew. Laughter ripples across the deck, sharp and fleeting. Beyond personal cleanliness, there's shipboard sanitation. Once a week you join the washing detail, a team tasked with scrubbing the deck, rinsing away spilled wine, fish scales and other deposits. You wield a brush made from straw and hemp, attaching it to a long hand. With seawater buckets sloshing, you sweep vigorously, water sluicing across the planks and overboard. The lieutenant times you muttering about morale and discipline. You imagine a spa back home laughing at this version of deep cleaning, but perspective shifts even with these efforts, stink lingers. You've debated whether the vinegar station should move leeward to keep smells off the bay. Historians still argue if ancient navies developed designated windward latrines for that reason or simply accepted the odor as the cost of conquest. You suspect the latter, and yet as you finish scrubbing and step back, the deck looks gleaming, at least compared to yesterday's slimy algae. Your final act of hygiene, a ritual towel. Each sailor has a rag pinned to their belt, not just for toilet duties, but for wiping sweat and drying off. You pat your face, neck, and forearms, feeling the fabric's rough weave release excess moisture. It's not luxurious, but in the midday heat it's everything. As you return the comb and charred powder box to the medicus's chest, you're reminded that hygiene aboard a warship is a constant negotiation between resource scarcity and hope. It's a dance of vinegar, seawater and scraps of cloth, and one that keeps you ever vigilant against disease, discomfort and despair. You settle back into your oar station, body refreshed, spirit lifted. The sea glistens ahead, and for a moment you imagine yourself walking down a marble corridor of a grand bathhouse. Then a squid brushes against the hull and you snap back to reality. Hygiene at sea will never match luxury on land, but it keeps you afloat, both physically and morally. As you journey onward beneath the endless sky, you trudge through another dawn chorus of oar creaks and groaning timbers, body humming with yesterday's exertion. But before you even think of breakfast or a much-needed visit to the latrine, you hear the familiar clack of a wooden staff striking the deck. That's your cue. Toilet discipline is as strictly regimented as weapon drill. You're not simply a free agent with a bladder. You're part of a military machine where every bodily function follows orders. The centurion bellows a time, latrina hora nona, the 9th hour of the watch. You recognize the twang of authority more sharply than any javelin scrap. At this precise moment, all enlisted men are expected to line up at the relief plank. Officers, of course, have private schedules and needn't comply in such public fashion. You check your tunic, not your belt, and fall into formation, joining 24 grumbling sailors shuffling toward the stern. A mainstream fact, Roman naval protocol designated specific crew members, often the lowest ranked, to clean the latrines, a role considered dishonorable yet crucial. These men, sometimes called scoparai, or ventilatators, wielded brushes and buckets to scrub the plank and rinse the tersorium buckets, ensuring the relief station didn't become a breeding ground for disease. Historians still argue whether these duties rotated weekly or were lifelong assignments for certain cohorts. As you wait, you survey the line. The man in front of you polishes his sponge stick with a flourish. Someone behind coughs, eyes watering from the lingering vinegar scent. You grip your own tersorium handle. It's become an extension of your arm, familiar and unwelcome. The salty breeze tugs at your hair, and you inhale the sharp tang of fermented lentils drifting up from the galley below. Discipline, you realize, means more than rigid rows of oars. It means choreographing every human need with military precision. Orders crackle over the deck, one at a time, no dawdling. A veteran sailor yawns so loudly it echoes like a low thunderclap, earning a sharp glance from the officer in charge. You shuffle forward, mindful that tardiness might earn extra cleaning duty. The plank itself stands gleaming, scrubbed within an inch of its life by this morning's scoparai. You can almost admire its polished wood if you squint and ignore the faint greenish tinge from seaweed scrubbing. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some captains kept a shell-based hourglass near the latrine, calibrated so that each sailor had exactly 2 minutes to complete their business. Overshoot your time and you risked a public shaming, complete with a dip in the briny hold for time piracy. Whether this gadget actually existed or is just a sailor's myth remains debatable, but the story floats through rowers' quarters like gull cries at dawn. When your turn arrives, you step up with posture drilled from months of standing at attention. You crouch over the hull, distance measured and precise, and let gravity do its work. The deck beneath you is spotless, save for a few stray grains of bark. You confirm the plank's scent, vinegar forward with a hint of rosemary from an officer's failed scent ligature. You take a breath, relish the semi-privacy of that moment and release. Below, the waves lap against the hull, muffling the sound of your effort. You close your eyes against the sting of sea spray and allow yourself one internal chuckle. If only your general could see you now. The marine routine never felt so human. A soft breeze tugs your tunic, and you brace with practiced ease, recalling the near-miss plank collapse of 2 days ago. That splintered memory reminds you that discipline isn't comfort, it's survival. Afterward, you reach for the tersorium. Here's your chance to prove you've learnt the morning lesson. Dip it in the rinse bucket, swirl twice, then wedge it back in the wooden frame to drip. The water sloshes gingerly, and you wiggle the sponge to shed chunks of yesterday's business. You notice a tiny sprig of lavender someone wedged into the handle, a gentle prank or an aroma experiment. The medicus frowns at that. Lavender supposedly encourages sleep, not sanitation. Historians still argue whether scented herbs in latrines were genuine hygiene, or mere morale boosters. As you step down, you salute the officer. Half salute really, since full formal salutes involve both hands. He nods curtly, ticking another name off his list. You slip back into line for inspection. Tunic buttoned, belt tight, sponge stick handled properly. Failure means scrubbing the deck. Again a task even the lowliest rower dreads more than a storm. The procession continues until every man has answered his call. Then the scoparai advance with their brushes, buckets of salt water and brooms made of straw. You stand at ease, arms behind your back, chin high while they scour the plank and planks around it. The rhythmic swoosh of bristles becomes almost musical, a percussive lullaby for the discipline of daily life. Even the rats retreat during this ritual, recognizing the cleansing as a temporary surrender of their turn. You return to your oar bench, noticing tiny droplets of rinse water glittering like gemstones on the deck. Amidst the smell of sweat and old fish, there's a fleeting sense of freshness. You pass by the baker's apprentice, who offers you a stale bread crust as a reward for punctuality. You accept, chew gratefully, and chuckle. This is the height of luxury, but make no mistake, the same discipline applies at night. The officer in charge of the watch patrols every couple of hours, shouting latrina inspection, and flicking a torch's light at any late riser. Attempting a midnight visit without orders could earn a brush across the knuckles or worse, a stint in irons. That's a punishment sailors whisper about. Confined to the cargo hold until dawn, with nothing but an empty bucket and their regret. Of course, this was all intended to maintain order. On land, the populous Romans thrived in communal latrines, chatting politics and poetry. At sea, a lack of discipline meant chaos, and a mutiny waiting to happen. Ensuring everyone went when ordered prevented sanitary crises, and kept the crew focused on rowing, fighting, or navigating, instead of suffering cramps from holding it. You roll your shoulders, ready for the next command. Morning drills await, and the memory of your precise 2-minute interval fuels your focus. You almost wish for that shell hourglass, anything to structure your day with clearer boundaries. In its absence, the centurion's voice remains your metronome. As the ship pitches toward the horizon, you marvel at how seamlessly bodily functions have been woven into military routine. Each scratch of the scrub brush, each command to cue, each timed release, serves the Empire's grand ambition. Even the humble latrine, once an afterthought, becomes a testament to Rome's order and foresight. You grip your oar, chest swelling with purpose. Somewhere beneath the waves, generations of sailors rest in watery silence, their stories carried on current. You too contribute to that legacy, one disciplined bathroom break at a time.
You wake before dawn with an unsettling lurch. Your stomach has declared a hostile takeover. The gentle rocking you once found soothing now feels like a torture device. You clutch the rail, face pale, as the horizon tilts beneath you. Today, seasickness is the enemy, and even the thought of the latrine plank makes your stomach twist with dread. You try to steady yourself, pressing a palm to your belly, but the churning in your gut won't be denied. You've heard of crews so afflicted they held it for days, only to collapse in misery when the ship finally docked. Historians still argue whether the ancients truly understood motion sickness, or blamed it on vengeful sea gods sending curses through the waves. You suspect a mix: nerves, salt, and a diet heavy on fermented fish. On shore, sailors chewed ginger or rue to calm queasy stomachs, mainland remedies that rarely made it to warships. Here you're left with a slop bucket, a simple wooden pail placed near the oarsmen's benches for emergency. It's half full of stale water, fish guts, and despair. The phrase "keep your bucket close" takes on harrowing new meaning when your gut rebels every few strokes. You clutch the bucket, sliding to one knee as bile rises. The coarse wood digs into your leg. You release, hoping the water washes your nausea away. Instead, the brine stings your throat and you retch into the pail's brim. The metallic tang of stomach acid mingles with salt and lentil mush. You close your eyes, breathing in the scent of vinegar from the distant latrine deck, wishing that plank were closer or at least within sight. Between retches you hear the steady rhythm of oars. Your comrades row on, oblivious to your plight or maybe too disciplined to stop. A fringe tidbit whispers through deck gossip. Some Roman sailors believed that staring at the horizon and sipping diluted wine could stave off nausea. Others insisted that the slime from fish intestines, eaten raw, was a secret cure. Whether these cures worked is unclear, but desperation breeds experimentation. When you manage a moment of respite, you gasp for air and consider walking to the latrine plank, but your legs tremble. You're practically hugging the deck. The Commodore's voice echoes orders: "Form ranks, brace yourself," and you realize no one will carry you to the stern for relief. So you make do with the slop bucket, a grim substitute for the customary latrine. A mainstream fact: Roman medical texts distinguished between sea vertigo and land vertigo, prescribing different treatments for each. Yet at sea, crew relied more on morale and shared grit than medical expertise. Some physicians aboard Medici navales carried potions of white poppy and mulled wine to soothe queasy stomachs, but their supplies ran out fast. Historians still debate whether these remedies actually eased sickness or simply offered placebo comfort. You swallow hard and peer at your reflection in the water cradled in the bucket, pale, eyes sunken, lips parched. You recall a story of a veteran sailor who, mid-battle, refused the bucket until enemy ships retreated. He claimed discipline overrode biology. You respect him, but right now you pity him. Eventually you wipe your mouth with the edge of your tunic, rinse in seawater, and tuck the bucket into a corner where no one will trip over it.
The scent lingers in your nostrils, an unwelcome souvenir. You check your sponge stick right where you left it, clean enough though seawater has stiffened the edges. One more indignity awaits, but at least it's predictable. Your oar call echoes row, you rise, legs shaky and take your place back on the bench. The motion that made you sick now becomes a steady rock, your body finding rhythm in misery. You grip the oak smooth handle and let the familiar tension in your arms ground you. Midway through the shift you overhear chatter about third wave sickness. The idea that seasickness often returns in waves, each milder than before until you acclimate. You hope this is true. Your head clears slightly, enough to notice the ship's carpenter, moving quietly across the deck, inspecting rope lines and whispering a prayer to Closina for your dignity. After the row, you stagger ashore at the next port call, clutching the plank's railing as relief washes over you. You make it to the latrine, the real one, just in time. The cool breeze there feels like salvation. You squat, focusing on the sound of water flowing under the public latrine's bench, marveling at how lavish it seems compared to ship life. Once finished, you lean back, arms draped over the stone edge, and inhale deep. A stray gust rustles nearby scrolls, carrying the chatter of townsfolk. You feel momentarily human again. Back on deck, you watch new recruits grip the rail, pallid faces reflecting your own morning misery. You offer a nod of solidarity, the silent greeting of those who have embraced the fight between stomach and sea. You pass along a piece of stale bread, a customary gift among sufferers, and they take it gratefully. In time you learn to pace yourself. You avoid rich foods before departure, sip diluted wine at odd hours, and stare unblinkingly at the horizon's ever-shifting line. Sometimes it works, often it doesn't, but at least you feel ready. By nightfall, as the ship rocks under a starry sky, you realize seasickness may never fully vanish, but with slop buckets, stale bread, and comrades who share your plight, you survive. And when dawn returns, and the latrina ora nona chimes once more, you'll face the plank with fresh respect, and maybe just a touch more courage. You hear the alarm, 3 short blasts of the horn, followed by frantic shouts. Enemy ships appear on the horizon, dark hulls cutting through the sea like predators closing in on prey. The captain's voice cracks over the din. Battle station. Oars slam into the water, and you pivot your body from toilet rhythm to combat-ready posture. Amidst the tension, a new challenge emerges. Nature's call is set aside under siege. For Romans, going into battle meant more than drawing swords. It meant suppressing every bodily urge. You clutch your tunic, heartbeat pounding in your ears while you steady your breath. In moments like this, the latrine plank and sponge bucket become distant memories, luxuries you can't afford. You're on hold, literally. A mainstream fact, during naval engagements, Roman crews often endured 12-hour watches without restroom breaks to maintain readiness. Historians still argue whether commanders consciously delayed bathroom access to ensure discipline, or simply regarded such needs as trivial in the face of war. Either way, you brace yourself for endurance beyond anything you've experienced. Your oar group surges forward, shields high, you row with all your might, pitched toward the enemy. The sharp scent of salt water mixes with the musk of fear, and every stroke sends a tremor through your abdomen. You grit your teeth, focusing on the rower ahead, Marcus the Swift, whose unwavering gaze reminds you that victory demands sacrifice. Holding it in becomes a test of will, as ancient as Rome itself. The clash is thunderous. Bronze rams crash against wooden hulls. Men shout in Latin, Greek, and the guttural tongues of subject peoples. You grip your waterlogged tunic to avoid a wardrobe malfunction mid-charge. Already, you feel the pressure building inside, a relentless drummer pounding at the gate. The thought of the latrine plank, sturdy and reliable, teases your mind. If only you could step off and squat, you'd be a new person. Instead, you fight on. Grappling hooks fling across decks, wooden planks splinter under your feet. A spear thuds into the hull, jolting you with a bone-deep tremor. You brace yourself, taking the blow as both shock and relief. Movement distracts from your inner turmoil. You row, you fight, you hold fast. A fringe tidbit whispers through your mind. Some Roman marines claimed that chewing on unripe pomegranate seeds helped curb the need to urinate, though the bitter taste likely made them gag more than it helped. Whether commanders endorsed this practice is unclear, but desperate men experiment with anything. You imagine Marcus the Elder crunching seeds mid-stroke, face twisted in grimace, and you stifle laughter. The battle turns chaotic. Grapeshot splinters wood around. The underdeck sloshes with spilled water and worse. You consider ducking below to the makeshift barrel, but the thought of abandoning your station is unthinkable. If you falter, the entire formation could crumble. You swallow hard, letting adrenaline and duty suppress every natural instinct. Minutes stretch into eternity. You're certain your bladder could have burst by now, yet you remain resolute. The centurion's voice rings out. Hold the line, do not yield. You grit your teeth, grip your oar's handle, and row as if your life depends on it, because it does. Finally, the signal sounds, retreat. You breathe deeply as the fleet pulls back, battered but intact. The planks of your ship tremble beneath the effort. You feel blood pounding behind your eyes, thirst clawing at your throat, and yes, an urgent reminder in your lower gut that demands relief. As order restores, the centurion barks. Form ranks for relief, relief at last. Crewmates exchange haggard smiles, a shared moment of triumph tinged with comedic relief. You shuffle toward the stern, every step a careful negotiation between triumph and collapse. You reach the latrine plank first, collapse against the support rope, and finally allow your body its overdue release. The sensation is staggering, like a dam finally breaking, waves of relief rushing through you. You close your eyes against the salt spray, savoring each second. Nearby comrades squat in unison, a tableau of warriors finally acknowledging their humanity. Here's a quirky detail. One veteran claims that during the Drepana naval ambush, they held bathroom duty entirely until after nightfall over 18 hours. Only to relieve themselves en masse once the coast was clear. Historians debate whether this unity of purpose genuinely boosted morale, or simply reflected commanders' obliviousness to basic needs. Regardless, the story endures as proof of Roman tenacity or stubbornness. You finish and dip your tersurium in the rinse bucket, now remarkably still stocked thanks to efficient scoperai. You rotate the sponge with practiced skill, grateful for any routine in the aftermath of chaos. The plank beneath you, once threatened by battle, seems more steadfast than ever, a silent ally in your survival saga. As you step down, you notice small tokens left by other sailors, a sprig of rosemary wedged into a plank knot, a carved emblem of Neptune drawn in chalk. These gestures, humble and secretive, mark the shared bond of those who endured both war and its bodily sacrifices. Back at the oar stations, you settle into exhausted rhythm. Waves lap at the hull, gulls circle overhead, and distant smoke hints at fires ashore. The world beyond your ship swirls with conflict, politics and intrigue, but here, on this plank, you tasted the balance between duty and biology, victory and relief. You grip your oar, gaze fixed on the horizon's uncertain line, and feel renewed. You fought not only the enemy but the most personal of battles within yourself. In the crucible of siege, you learn that discipline demands both steel and surrender, that empire is built on the strength to conquer and to finally, gloriously,
You slip out under starlight, drawn by an inexplicable craving for something distinctly human, connection. The day's drills and latrine discipline have faded into the background, but your heart still hums with memories of home. Tonight, there's no plank, no bucket, no oar. Instead, you wander toward the stern latrine as if drawn by a magnetic pull, clutching a wax tablet and stylus borrowed from the officer's cabin. You're on a mission to leave a message for someone you've never met. Yes, believe it or not, Roman sailors sometimes penned love notes on latrine walls. The cramped wooden beams and canvas screens became impromptu confessionals, where words of longing mingled with sea spray. You wouldn't choose such a place for a romantic epistle today, but at the time the anonymity and proximity of fellow sailors made it oddly sacred. You settle onto the familiar plank, candle in one hand and tablet in the other. The wood beneath your tunic feels smoother now, polished by hundreds of squats and scribbles.
You glance around to ensure privacy. Even shared latrines had moments of hush under moonlight, broken only by distant snores or the soft lapping of waves. A mainstream fact: graffiti in Roman public latrines often included erotic poems, political jabs, and personal insults, revealing an ancient culture's surprisingly candid voice. Historians still argue whether naval latrine graffiti was copied from city forums or independently cultivated by sailors seeking companionship at sea. Here you aim to add your own verse, something to cut through the salty gloom of endless voyages. You press stylus to wax, etching a few lines in flowing italics. In Neptune's hush I see your eyes, beyond the foam my sweetest prize. It feels both absurd and exhilarating. Ship lanterns flicker as a breeze catches your candle's flame, forcing you to lean away and steady your hand. The tablet holds only half a dozen lines, a tiny vessel of hope in a sea of confinement. Nearby you notice others' carvings faintly visible on a wooden beam. Julia, remember our last shore leave, and Lucius, returns. Some inscriptions are crude. I dream of your tunic unbound, others poetic, and one even includes a crude sketch of two entwined dolphins, a sailor's romantic creature of choice. The variety surprises you, reflecting each man's inner life flushed out in the most unlikely place. A quirky tidbit: one preserved naval graffiti from a Mediterranean wreck reads, "My butt is cold but my heart burns for Claudia." Whether this was sardonic humor or genuine declaration is anyone's guess, but it underscores how sailors turned necessity into narrative. You can't help but laugh softly, imagining the author perched right where you sit now. You finish your stanza, then press the wax tablet against the plank, leaving a faint imprint before packing it away. For permanence you carve your final note directly into the wood. Gaius alias loves Cornelia Victor. Return soon. The act scratches deeper than any sponge stick, leaving grooves that will outlast both of you. You pause, running a fingertip over the letters, feeling the echo of your own heartbeat. Beyond romance, latrine walls also hosted polls and wagers. Some crews voted on who would command the next foray or predicted the outcome of a distant siege. You spot one tally below your carving. 12 vote yes, 3 vote no. Should we visit Cyprus? The fusion of love, politics, and toilet humor fascinates you. Historians still argue whether such messages were meant for serious courtship or simply served as distractions from monotony. You lean toward both in the void of sea and war. Any spark of humanity carries weight. You stand, brushing sawdust from your tunic, the candle guttered, its flame dancing across the plank surface. In that brief illumination, the latrine felt less like a necessity and more like a communal altar, where sailors confessed, conspired, and connected through carved words. As you extinguish the candle and step away, a final glance reveals someone has added beneath your carving, "May Neptune guide your hearts." A silent response from an unknown correspondent, or a hopeful prank, you can't tell, but it's enough. Under the night sky you walk back to the ore station, heart lighter despite the sea's constant sway. Tomorrow you know you'll row harder, endure the latrine routine with renewed resolve, and face the plank with less trepidation. Because somewhere in these carved lines you've discovered that even on a warship's toilet, love finds a way. You step onto solid ground at last. Your legs wobble like newly hatched chicks as you disembark onto the limestone. The ship's creak and sway vanish beneath your boots, replaced by the chatter of merchants and the clatter of carts. It's a small port town, walls stained by salt and sun, but here at this moment it feels like paradise. The promise of real toilets await. You follow the carpenter and a few fellow sailors toward a public latrine built against the city's outer wall. It's a simple stone edifice with a low roof, a row of keyhole-shaped openings perched above a steady trickle of water flowing through a concealed channel. You inhale the faint aroma of fresh water mingled with earth, a scent so unfamiliar it nearly makes you smile. A mainstream fact: Roman port towns often featured public latrines connected to local sewer systems, with running water supplied by nearby aqueducts or wells, offering far more reliable sanitation than shipboard facilities. Historians still argue whether smaller coastal settlements maintained fully flushed latrines, or relied on intermittent manual cleaning, but you're willing to accept either version today. The entrance is unassuming, a low archway leading to a long bench of smooth stone interrupted by evenly spaced holes. You squint in the dim light,
spot the faint runnels underneath, and realize you won't have to balance over a plank or barrel. Instead, you'll simply you catch your breath, feeling your shoulders drop by several pounds. Near you, a trader in a woolen cloak hums Admiral's hymn, an off-key dirge you've heard the centurion whistle during drills. For once the tune feels comforting. Inside there's space for about a dozen users. The bench is wide enough for modest elbow room. No alchemy of wood and rope needed here. You choose a spot 6 holes in, mindful of naval superstition that certain positions bring bad luck. You settle gingerly onto the cool stone, enjoying the sensation of stable ground beneath your thigh. No tide to dodge, no seagulls circling, just the quiet burble of water below. A fringed tidbit floats to mind. Some Roman latrines featured carved gutter covers designed to resemble sea creatures, dolphins, octopi, even tiny triremes, perhaps as a cheeky nod to maritime life. Whether these decorations truly existed in port facilities or were solely the pride of grand urban latrines remains debated. But here you imagine tiny fish engraved underneath, smiling up at you as you relieve days' worth of shipboard misery. You lean forward, resting elbows on your knees, and permit yourself 3 deep breaths, each one a small celebration of gravity, plumbing and private bodily function. As you go, you overhear 2 locals debating olive prices, their voices soft and distant. It's odd, you're accomplishing the same act as the sailors beside you, yet it feels less like work and more like a spa treatment. Next you reach for the communal sponge. Yes, the infamous tersorium appears here too, but at least it's accompanied by a basin whose floor is constantly flushed by fresh water. You rinse it twice under the gentle stream, and for the first time in days, the sponge feels genuinely clean. You swish it around until the water runs clear enough to read the trader's faintly scratched name on its wooden handle. Smiling, you return it to its vessel, confident that no salt spray or barrel wobble will taint its surface. A mainstream fact: ancient Roman latrines on land sometimes employed continuous water flow beneath benches to carry away waste, using slight gradients to maintain movement. Many towns reused channel water for irrigation once it left the latrine, a recycling practice both efficient and to modern ears somewhat unsavory. Scholars still argue how strictly sewage water was separated from drinking supplies, but you decide you don't want to know more. After washing, you stand and stroll outside, spotting a cluster of small wash basins carved into the exterior. A woman sits nearby, eyes closed, filling a bowl with rosewater and tossing petals in for fragrance. She offers you a nod and a sprig of lavender, an ancient courtesy of comfort extended to weary travelers. You accept gratefully, pinning the lavender to your tunic as a keepsake. Nearby, a merchant has set up a platter of fresh figs and goat cheese. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you that hunger and thirst are the twin heirs to relief. You buy a handful of figs for a few copper coins, biting into their soft flesh as juice dribbles down your chin. A sailor next to you laughs and offers a cloth, true camaraderie, built upon shared bodily humbling. A quirky detail: some port latrines featured small niches in the walls where users left coins as offerings to the goddess Clochina, patroness of sewers and springs. It seems half devotional, half superstitious, perhaps a prayer for clean water or a hope for easier visits. You drop a coin in the niche, whispering a silent thanks to powers unseen. You wander to a nearby fountain, cupping cool water in both hands and splashing your face. The sensation of running water untethered by bucket constraints or salt spray is heavenly. As you look into the fountain's polished marble basin, you almost mistake the reflection for the soft ripples of the sea. You laugh softly at yourself, realizing how profoundly the vessel's latrine deprivation shaped your appreciation for land-borne plumbing. The town square bustles with activity. Donkeys bray, children laugh, and pigeons flutter around crumb-laden tables. You pause at a small shrine, a dedication to Fortuna where sailors often prayed for safe harbor. You leave a second coin, a token of gratitude not just for this port's welcome but for the respite from constant latrine anxiety. Finally you return to the quay, belatedly remembering the ship's schedule. The trireme awaits, sails billowing like patient beasts. You board, feeling restoration in every joint. As you ascend the gangplank, your steps steady on wood once more. You glance back at the port latrine's stone bench and whisper, "Farewell, my friend, until next time." Back aboard, the ship's facilities seem almost charming in comparison to the open sea. You squat on the familiar plank once more, sponge in hand, but this time with renewed respect for what you have and what you endured. The stone thrown at port was a fleeting luxury, yet its memory will buoy you through many a rough time, because whether afloat or ashore, the simple act of relief binds you to your crewmates, to ancient practices, and to the universal truth that no empire can conquer the demands of the human body, and for now that knowledge feels like home.
You'd never expect to see a woman aboard a Roman warship, yet every so often, necessity or favor granted one onto the deck. Maybe she's a highborn messenger, a warrior's wife, or an honored priestess of Ceres ensuring grain supplies stay blessed. Either way, her presence throws the ship's toilet routine into sharp relief. Privacy, already scarce, becomes practically mythical. You're rowing at dawn when you first notice her shadow among the benches. Tall, poised, draped in a stola that flutters like a sail in the breeze, she strides toward the stern relief plank with quiet confidence. And for a heartbeat you forget you're mid-squat. Then the reality crashes back. This is no land villa with curtained cubicles. It's a rattling vessel where modesty rides every wave. On land, Roman toilets offered gendered spaces, men to one side, women to another, each communal but segregated by custom. A mainstream fact. Many public latrines featured separate seating areas or dedicated times for women to ensure decorum. Historians still argue whether these divisions were strictly enforced or more of a polite suggestion in busier venues. Out here, however, the plank knows no such rules. You watch as she approaches a makeshift screen, a length of canvas rigged on poles by the carpenter. It's flimsy, a patchwork of sailcloth stitched together at the last port call. But it's something. She ducks behind it, feet bare on the weathered wood, and you catch the faint scent of rosewater drifting through the slats. It's oddly comforting, like a whisper of home. Your shift ends just beyond her screen, so you linger nearby to avoid awkward proximity. The plank's rope belts creak under her weight. You recall how it creaked when you first stepped on it. Terrified of an unexpected dip into the sea, she exhales softly, and for a moment the ship's roar dims. It's just her breathing against wood and wind. She uses a small ceramic chamber pot, an upscale touch, likely her own, placed behind the screen on a double-layered crate. It's the only real concession to privacy. A pot instead of plunging into open water. A fringe tidbit. Some wealthy women insisted on folding cloths moistened with honey and rose extract instead of sponges, believing it softened the skin and warded off irritation. Whether that actually worked or simply left a sticky residue is unclear, but you admire her preparedness. Above you, gulls wheel, unperturbed by matters below. A light joke drifts through your mind. Even the birds have more privacy than we do. You catch yourself smiling. After she finishes, the chamber pot is lifted by a young attendant, likely the ship's steward, who tiptoes it toward the stern release platform. You watch the pot's contents swirl into the sea with a muted splash. The steward glances back at you, and you offer a respectful nod. He nods in return, as if to say, some things are universal. Meanwhile, you're expected to maintain routine, dip the communal tersorium, queue for your turn, and swallow any lingering awkwardness. But lately, you realize it's not just about biology or hygiene, it's about dignity. On land, even the humblest latrine had a semblance of discretion. Here, every dip of the sponge is an act of shared vulnerability. She emerges from the screen, smoothing her stola, and catches your eye. There's no mockery, only acceptance. In that glance you sense solidarity. All of you aboard this vessel answer the same call of nature, whether clothed in coarse tunics or silk-stained robes. A light joke bubbles up. It's the one time rank and gender fall away. Everyone's equally human. You nearly blurt it out, but choose silence, letting the moment pass like a gentle wave. Her attendant unhooks a small bundle of perfumed cloths. You peek. Lavender, mint, and something you can't name. She uses one, tucks it into her girdle, and steps from the makeshift cubicle. The canvas screen flutters, and for a heartbeat you see the ship as a living creature. Ribs of oars, sinews of ropes, and now a single panel of privacy stitched into its side. You recall another fringe detail, a rumor of a ship where women sailors crafted portable wooden latrine boxes,
small enough to carry yet sturdy enough to squat on, complete with an imprinted family crest. Whether that ever existed or sank with its owner is lost to the deep, but the idea captures the audacity of Roman innovation. She walks back to the deck with measured grace, joining an officer for morning orders. You respect how seamlessly she shifts from private necessity to public duty. Meanwhile, you adjust your belt and ready your sponge stick, feeling the planks wood firm beneath your boots. The next shift you'll return to the same spot, share the same breeze, confront the same awkward ballet of rope and board. It won't be comfortable, and privacy will remain a scarce commodity. Yet because someone stitched that screen, molded that pot, and carried scented cloths, you remember that even in the roughest settings, ingenuity and empathy find a way. You smile at the thought tonight. When you drift off to sleep, you'll recall her quiet strength and consider petitions to Neptune for better plank screen. You might even carve a tiny doodle of a privacy curtain into the wood below your own squat spot, a small tribute to those who seek dignity at sea, because aboard a Roman warship, when nature calls, it calls for everyone regardless of rank, gender or tune. And in answering that call you discover that compassion, like the tides, flows most powerfully where it's needed most. You're leaning against a bench door when the centurion's shrill whistle splits the midday calm. Enemy on the starboard bow, he cries. Heart pumping, you scramble toward the stern, where the latrine once stood, now repurposed as an odd sort of artillery station. Today, waste is no longer a private affair. Today it's a weapon. In the heat of naval combat, Romans sometimes did more than ram hulls or fire flaming arrows. They lobbed human refuse, chamber pot contents, filthy rags, and the dreaded fermented urine straight at enemy decks. The goal wasn't just to repel boarders, it was to sow chaos, contaminate supplies, and strike terror into noble noses. You grasp your sponge stick in one hand and a capped chamber pot in the other, ready for your role in this unsavory siege. A mainstream fact. Historical accounts from Polybius and Plutarch record that besieging forces occasionally hurled excrement over city walls to spread disease and lower morale. Historians still argue whether these tactics were widely employed in naval engagements or confined to extreme siegecraft. But on your vessel today, the plank's humble legacy ascends to frontline warfare. You shuffle to the makeshift battlement, a waist-high parapet, reinforced with crates and oilskins, where chamber pots and buckets are arrayed like munition. The carpenter, grinning in grim satisfaction, passes you a pot filled with a thick slurry that smells like molten cheese mixed with vinegar. A fringed tidbit whispers through your mind. One eccentric centurion reportedly soaked his improvised missile in rotting fish oil, believing the stench would cling to enemy shields and linger for days. Whether that was genius or madness remains hotly contested, but it sure made sailors think twice before boarding. Your heart hammers as the rival triman draws closer, oars churn, battle cries echo, and the smell of heated bronze fills your nostrils. You spot enemy marines preparing to grapple. Now is your moment. Gripping the pot's rim, you heave with all your strength. Imagining a slow-motion arc of putrid doom, the pot sails outward, its contents arcing like liquid cannon fire before splattering across the enemy's deck in a revolting burst. An uproar follows. Marines gag, scramble for any cover, and slip on the foul slick. You hear curses in Greek, Latin and other tongues as one man frantically flings a cloak over his head, and another collapses in stunned silence. The repellent odor wafts back to your ship, prompting cheers from your comrades. Victory, at least in this skirmish, belongs to the unlikeliest artillery. As you reload, you note the makeshift ammunition, chamber pots repurposed from officers' private holdings, carpenter-carved buckets stamped with crude offensive slogans, Vae Victis, or simply Stink Here, and sealed with beeswax to prevent accidental leak. Supplies are limited, each pot is precious. You realize that ranking officers guard their personal vessels closely, lest they be conscripted for battle. Rank and privilege persist even in the theater of toilet war. Between volleys you steady yourself against the parapet's rough wood. The wind carries the rank stench upward, and you close your eyes, inhaling a mix of triumph and nausea. A light joke bubbles up. Take that, you fancy Greeks. Taste our empire's fiber-rich diet.
You stifle a grin, mindful that etiquette in war demands more decorum than human. Combat surges around you, grappling hooks hook, swords clash, and the enemy's deck board creaks under chaos. You heft another pot, aiming for a group of marines massed near the prow. Your throw is less graceful, more desperate, sending waste cascading in a rancid water. You brace for pushback, but the enemy retreats momentarily, shields raised, eyes watering. Even hardened warriors bow to the power of stench. A fringe historical debate persists. Did such tactics genuinely spread illness, or did they merely traumatize opponents psychologically? Some scholars claim that disease vectors, bacteria, and parasites rode the refuse into soldiers' wounds and food stores, causing outbreaks days later. Others argue the Roman emphasis on vinegar and antiseptics mitigated such risk. You suspect a bit of both. No one survives a face full of filth without some lingering dread. As the battle tips in your favor, the centurion signals a general charge. You fling one last chamber pot, nearly empty but still potent, and join the boarding party, sponge stick abandoned in the hay. Amid overturned crates and flashing swords, you glimpse the enemy's eyes wide, stunned and unmistakably fragrant. You press forward, adrenaline mingling with the stench, and secure victory with the clang of steel and the hush of retreating foe. Afterward, you find yourself back at the stern parapet, surveying the aftermath. The enemy's deck looks like a butcher's block, streaked with grime and straw. You sniff the air warily, grateful for the breeze carrying filth away. Nearby, comrades rinse out pots and rinse themselves in seawater, jokes about toilet tactics already bouncing around. One fellow complains that the odor clung to his tunic for hours. Another insists he saw a rat drown itself rather than swim through the soup of waste. Despite the unclean nature of the weapon, a sense of pride takes root. You participated in a strategy that combines Roman ingenuity, psychological warfare, and the ultimate recycling of resources. Who needs flaming arrows when one well-aimed pot can turn the tide of battle? You tap the parapet's wooden edge, a callback to the splintered plank you once feared, and salute the resourcefulness of your forebears. As night falls, the deck is washed down, painfully stripping away both blood and excrement. The sponge bucket is refilled, sponges are rinsed in vinegar, and the latrine plank stands ready for return to its mundane purpose. You glance at it, your toes brushing its worn wood, and reflect on how something so humble could become so powerful. Tomorrow you'll row, rinse and relax, or as relaxed as one can be with memories of today's pungent triumph. But tonight you know that on Roman warships, even the most base of functions can rise to the heights of military art. And when nature's call doubles as a weapon, you realize victory sometimes stinks, but in the most glorious.
You lean over the rail as the ship rests at anchor above a silent expanse of blue-green water, imagining what lies beneath the surface. Years of storms, skirmishes, and time have worn away countless Roman warships. Wood gone to splinters, iron fittings corroded, and yet among the wreckage, fragments of toilet technology endure. Archaeologists still argue whether these remnants can truly reveal everyday life aboard. But tonight you become the explorer, diving into the past through broken planks and marine incrustations. The story begins with a chance discovery, a shell-strewn mound a few leagues from the coast, where a medieval fisherman's net snagged on something solid. He hauled up a plank with bronze fittings and a curious half-circle opening too refined to be mere hull bracing. Scholars later identified it as a latrine beam, one of the rare physical survivors of naval sanitation. From this humble artifact, entire theories about shipboard hygiene sprang forth, like barnacles on a hidden keel. You picture the diver torch bobbing underwater, bubbles curling upward as they brush away centuries of sediment. Beneath layers of algae, they uncover faint tool marks, neat chisel strokes where craftsmen carved the opening, perhaps to fit a wooden cover or ring. A mainstream fact, some maritime archaeologists have documented carved channels on these planks, interpreting them as rudimentary flush guides used by Roman fleets. Historians still argue whether these grooves directed rainwater for cleaning or served purely structural purposes, but their presence hints at deliberate design.
The latrine fragments often compared with small shards of ceramic bits of sewer pipes repurposed at sea. One particularly intriguing find off the coast of Mare Internum included curved amphora fragments fitted beneath a plank, leading to speculation that sailors adapted broken jars into catch basins. You imagine the carpenter patching holes with tar and lattice wood, the sponge bucket thrown in for good measure, all in an effort to keep the deck from becoming a cesspit. These underwater sites yield more than wood and pottery. You, an armchair archaeologist, tonight hear of fossilized sponges preserved in silt, their once soft pores now rigid under mineral incrustation. They cling to latrine beams like marine fossils, a fringed tidbit that suggests the original tersoria didn't just wash away. Some believe crews discarded sponges when they deteriorated, letting them sink as organic anchors for future reefs, whether intentional or accidental. These sponge fossils fascinate experts who debate their frequency and function. Such finds rarely come in isolation. Wrecks yield personal items, bronze mirrors, combs carved from bone, and even carved graffiti fill legible beneath barnacles. One wreck revealed a carved inscription beside a latrine beam. "Here lies my patience, Gaius Claudius," offering an unfiltered glimpse of a sailor's gallows humor. This text aligns with land-based graffiti methods, suggesting crews mirrored city practices at sea. You reflect on the sense of continuity. A battered plank on display in a museum might bear dim grooves, but its story echoes your own. The careful rotation of a sponge, the jarring jolt of a wave-rocked plank, the communal chorus of groans and laughter. Archaeologists find cut marks indicating plank replacements, evidence of mid-campaign repairs. You too have felt the tremor of splintering wood and the relief of a fresh latrine beam underfoot. Beyond physical fragments, scientific analysis offers clues. Tiny residue samples taken from latrine plankwood reveal traces of olive oil and vinegar, substances once used for cleaning. Historians still argue if these concoctions were efficient disinfectants or merely bearable deodorants, but their chemical fingerprints confirm sailors' attempts at hygiene. You imagine a medicus dipping files into these buckets, noting down recipes in cramped handwriting on wax tablets. Underwater mapping of wreck sites often shows latrine positions clustered near sterns, consistent across vessel types. This spatial consistency underscores strategic design, placing toilets aft minimized fouling of rowing zones, and facilitated waste ejection into the wake. You picture the original shipwrights, aligning beams, marking notches and calculating overhangs, all to balance utility with seaworthiness. The afterlife of a ship's toilet extends beyond In some coastal towns, locals dredged up masses of waste-encrusted wood, used in building foundations or even burnt as fuel, an ironic recycling of sanitation history. Folk tales emerged of cursed wood that smelled perpetually sour, warning future generations of the ship of filth buried beneath their homes. These stories make archaeologists smile. They reveal the cultural footprint left by long-forgotten latrines. As you watch the sunset dye the sea orange, you realize that the silent remains beneath these waves speak volumes. Each fragment, each sponge fossil, and each carved insult stitches together a narrative of resilience, resourcefulness, and the inescapable universality of bodily function. The wooden remnants may be scarce, but their impact is profound, reminding modern scholars and sleepers alike that even the mightiest fleets couldn't wash away the need for a toilet. You let the image of those submerged beams drift in your mind like a gentle current. The sea has claimed many things, but it cannot erase human ingenuity or humor. And so, as you prepare for tomorrow's watch and tomorrow's latrine routine, you carry with you the echo of hammers chiseling wood, of sponges rinsed in vinegar, and of sailors who faced the same awkward necessities beneath a different sky. You settle into your spot on the plank one last time, the wood worn smooth by countless sailors' souls. The salty spray mists your face and the gentle creaks of the ship feel like a lullaby tuned to your heart. As the evening light softens, you realize this is your final flush through history. One more squat, one more swipe of the sponge, and then silence. You recall the earliest voyages when Roman fleets first braved unknown seas. Those triremes had no latrine whatsoever, forcing crews to cling to ropes and pray for mercy. A mainstream fact,
Early Republican-era ships often lacked any designated relief area, leaving sailors to relieve themselves over the sides at random intervals. Historians still argue when formal latrine structures first appeared. Some place it as early as the Punic Wars. Others insist it wasn't codified until the Augustan Navy reforms. Either way, necessity drove innovation. Tonight you squat over the familiar hole, the world below dissolving into soft waves of dark water and moonlight. You feel the slight bounce of the deck, a reminder that the sea remains unchanged, indifferent to human custom. You take a deep breath and let nature's call ease your mind, savoring the cool air around you. Your sponge stick rests ready, its sponge head tattered, but reliable. You dip it into the rinse bucket, half full of vinegar and seawater, half full of memory. You twist it deliberately, each turn echoing with laughter and groans from nights past. A fringe tidbit: some naval doctors recommended infusing the rinse water with aromatic resins, pine or cypress sap, to mask odor. Whether crews actually managed this at sea or simply whispered rumors is unclear, but the notion illustrates Romans' endless quest to balance pragmatism with comfort. As you finish, you pause to look over the ship's side. Below, the wake curls in gentle swirls, carrying your waste into eternity. You imagine it drifting past coral reefs into fish schools and beyond, until it disperses into the vast Mediterranean tapestry. The image is strangely poetic. You return your sponge stick overhead to dry, tying it between two support beams where last night's lavender sprig still lingered. That sprig left by the woman aboard now feels like a benediction, a final token of empathy linking you to every soul on deck. You trace its leaves with your fingertips, offering a silent salute to the compassion that survived cramped quarters and crude facility. The plank beneath you, once a source of anxiety, now feels like a stage set for countless acts of survival, camaraderie, and ingenuity. You remember the plank's collapse, the barrel fiasco, the stink-laden volleys of toilet warfare, each incident a chapter in your seafaring saga. Together they formed the mosaic of daily life at sea, equal parts absurd and profound. You rise, dusting wood shavings from your tunic, and linger at the railing for a moment. A mainstream fact emerges. By the imperial era, some Roman warships featured multiple latrines and basic water channels, an evolution reflecting decades of trial and error. Historians still debate whether these systems were standardized across fleets or varied by region and command. Given the diversity of shipwreck finds from North Africa to Greece, the truth likely falls somewhere in between. Below deck, the oarsmen finish their final strokes for the day. You collect your sponge bucket, give it a knowing nod, and pass it to the next watch. The ritual, once novel, now feels eternal. A cycle of need and relief, discomfort and ingenuity, woven into the very fabric of the vessel. You lean against the mast, letting yourself drift into memory. You recall first boarding this ship, green behind the ears, terrified of splinters and sea spray. Now you're a veteran, fluent in the unspoken language of latrine queues, sponge rotations and rope knots. The ship feels like a living entity, spine of oars, sinews of ropes, and the humble plank at its heart. As moonlight glints on the sails, you whisper your final thanks to Closina and Neptune for sanitation, for safe passage, and for the unexpected lessons of human necessity. You step away, letting the plank recede into shadow, and head toward the forecastle where sleep and tomorrow's row await. Slow the tide now, gentle breaths of salt-laced air carried on a softer breeze. Your shift is done, and the deck falls silent except for the hushed lap of water against the hull. As you recline against a damp coil of rope, feel the day's tensions wash away. Each creak of wood fades into the distance, replaced by the soft chorus of night. Distant gull calls, the whisper of wind in the rigging, and the pulse of waves beneath you. Let your muscles relax, your mind unfurl like a sail at dawn. The sponge stick's wooden handle, once a reminder of awkward duty, now rests at your side, a talisman of resilience. The plank has served its purpose. Its story becomes legend in the hush between breaths. You close your eyes, recalling the lavender sprig's gentle scent, the warmth of shared laughter at the barrel's wobble, and the quiet solidarity of sailors bound by every necessity. The midnight sea envelops you in its velvet embrace, each ripple carrying dreams of distant shores and familiar comforts. No emperor's banquet hall could rival this quiet moment, this fragile peace aboard your humble tribe. As thoughts drift toward home, marble courtyards, tiled baths, and stone latrines with running water, allow the sea's gentle rhythm to lull you deeper. In this final hush your body surrenders to calm. The plank, the bucket, the sponge, they vanish into memory, leaving only the soft hum of the ocean's timeless song. And as your breath slows, imagine yourself adrift on velvet waves, carried toward restful slumber. Sweet dreams.